Alright, and welcome to my Bloodborne Blood Level 4 Beginner's Guide, meaning a walkthrough on how to get through the entire game without leveling up, starting on the lowest possible level. This is one of the most common challenge runs in the Soulsborne series, but it's not common to present it as an actual guide. So just like I've done before for Dark Souls 1 and 3, my aim in this walkthrough is to explain in detail how you can make it through the game on the lowest level, especially if you think you're not good enough at the game. In other words, I will point out what route you can take, helpful strategies, and just what you need to take into account when you don't have the benefit of a high damage output, tons of stamina and the ability to tank a lot of hits. So how does that affect how you approach the game? However, it's not about having the easiest time possible. We're not going for cheese tactics in the sense of glitches or whatever. We're also not going to farm extra powerful gems in the chalice dungeons or things like that. After all, once you see the ending credits roll by, you do want to have the feeling that you improved as a player. Of course, you have to keep in mind that my approach is not necessarily the best possible approach. This isn't my only Bloodborne walkthrough. I have also made a guide on how to do a no Hunter's Dream challenge, which is a lot more difficult than this one. So definitely make sure to check that one out as well if you're interested. You will find the link below. Now, when it comes to the presentation of this walkthrough, contrary to the No Hunter's Dream challenge, where I wanted it to be one continuous recording, for this one I want to keep it to the point. So just like I did for Dark Souls 1 and 3, it's a sort of hybrid between a full playthrough and a compilation of all the relevant sections. So this walkthrough will include all areas, all bosses, including the DLC, yet excluding all the challenge dungeons. However, this does mean that I take speed into account. So for the most part, I will be running past most regular enemies, cutting out loading screens or trips back to the Hunter's Dream, or perhaps even speeding up the footage in some places. Now, obviously, on your first time doing BL4, you don't want to skip all the regular enemies. I didn't do that myself either. After all, the areas themselves are also part of the challenge. But as you would understand, since I need to add commentary after the fact, I need to keep this walkthrough short enough for practical purposes. So for your own playthrough, just take as much time as you want or need. But of course, in the end, you don't really need to kill many regular enemies for blood echoes when you're not leveling up. However, the difference between Bloodborne and Dark Souls is that you can buy healing items. So whereas I ended Dark Souls 1 with about 1,000,000 souls at the end, in this game you can always spend your echoes on blood vials, bullets, beast blood pellets and fire and bolt paper. Now, as you would expect, the first sections of the game are the least interesting, as they don't really differ that much from a regular playthrough. You would be at a low level in the first areas of the game regardless. Although, don't underestimate the difference that the earlier levels make. The difference between level 4 and level 24 is a lot more noticeable than the difference between level 24 and 44. Regardless, during the first areas I will primarily focus on some central aspects of a BL4 run. And I will also use the first bosses to demonstrate some of these principles. Alright, so as you saw, I picked the saw cleaver as my starting weapon, and this is of vital importance on BL4. While the other two weapons are definitely usable as well, and they have their own benefits, but the reason for the saw cleaver is that it has both a high base damage, as well as the unique ability to rapidly increase your beast blood meter when you're using beast blood pellets. Well, the saw spear has it too, but that one has a lower base damage. Now, beast blood is going to be very important the farther you get into the game, because contrary to an SL1 run in Dark Souls, where your damage output is actually really not that much of a problem, your damage output in Bloodborne is much lower in comparison. Also, the downside of using beast blood, namely that it lowers your defenses, is far less noticeable when your life bar is this short. After all, regardless, you cannot take that many hits anyway. And speaking of damage output, what I'm doing first is to collect all the bloodstone shards necessary to upgrade my weapon to +2 before taking on the first two bosses. The route I'm taking through the game is designed to get your weapon upgraded as high as possible, as fast as possible. Well, technically that's not entirely true, as there are some ways to increase it even faster by going to chalice dungeons or to do some very specific farming. But trust me, if you take the same route as me, your damage output will definitely be sufficient. And I really don't have the patience anyway to do much farming in this playthrough. So that means that before fighting the Cleric beast and Father Gascoigne, you can collect only enough bloodstone shards to upgrade your weapon to +2. Then before the Bloodstarved Beast it will be at +3. +5 before Vicar Amelia. +7 before fighting the Shadows of Yharnam. +9 when fighting the One Reborn. And the Blood Rock can of course be found after Mikolash. Now there is another difference regarding damage output between Bloodborne and Dark Souls, and that's your repose damage, or visceral attacks as they are called in this game. Visceral attacks suck at Blood level 4. The farther you get into the game, the more useless they become. Critical damage is linked to your level in general and your skill stat specifically, so no matter what you do, you cannot do any decent amount of damage with your visceral attacks. And no, not even using the specific runes will actually increase it to a decent amount. So one thing that you will need to learn is to do a charged R2 attack instead of a visceral attack, after you parry, backstab or stun an enemy. Charged R2 attacks are pretty effective because of counter damage, which applies when an enemy is stunned. Now having said that, visceral attacks can still be useful at specific times. Of course in the first area they still do somewhat decent damage anyway, but also because it is safe damage. You have iframes when doing a visceral, and on top of that, if you took damage yourself right before performing a visceral, you will automatically regain that health. You can even use a rune that gives you health back when doing a visceral. So there are some cases where it can be good to do a visceral despite it doing less damage. Another thing regarding the combat, in case you're not familiar with the Saw Cleaver, or even if you are, I mean it was my main weapon on my first playthrough, and I hardly ever even used this specific attack, but what you will see me do a lot is using transform attacks. If you do an R1 attack and follow up with an L1, you attack while transforming. And this has several benefits. First of all, it does a lot more damage than a regular R1. Secondly, it does a lot of poise damage, meaning that you can stun enemies with it, even breaking their attack animations. And thirdly, this is the attack that rapidly increases your beast blood meter. So starting a boss fight by getting several transform attacks in will substantially increase your damage output. So it's definitely beneficial to make a habit out of using transform attacks. In fact, there's even a fourth benefit, and that's reach. The Saw Cleaver has almost no reach. You virtually need to touch enemies in order to hit them. However, transform attacks allow you to hit an enemy when it would be just out of your reach for an R1 attack. And it also has this wide sweep motion to it that can hit multiple enemies at once. So it's very effective against groups of enemies. However, the extended mode of the Saw Cleaver I wouldn't bother with. It's weak, it's slow, and it doesn't have the serrated bonus against beast enemies. Contrary to the Saw Spear, unfortunately. By the way, I haven't mentioned what gun to use. That's just a matter of personal preference. I always use the pistol. It is definitely advisable to get rid of your regular clothes as fast as possible. You can either get the Yharnam set in the Hunter's Dream for only 2000 echoes, or you can get one of the versions of the Hunter set in the sewers. Of course, right after Father Gascoigne we can pick up the other version of the Hunter set. Now with this low amount of HP, it doesn't make all that much difference what you wear. Unless of course you take a hit that takes like 95% of your life bar. If your defenses were a little lower, that would have been a one-hit kill. And of course, about halfway through the game I succumbed to the holy principle of Fashion Souls, or Fashion Born in this case. But other than defenses, there are also some sets that increase your beasthood. In fact, the regular Hunter set has one of the highest beasthood in the game. And there's another set with even higher beasthood that you can get early in the game, and that's the Ashen Hunter set from Jura in Old Yharnam. So wearing those clothes, together with keeping your insight low, allows you to increase your beast blood meter even a bit faster. There is another instance where I choose to wear a specific outfit, but that's something for much later in the playthrough. Namely, I will show you how you can prevent getting one-shotted from Abritus's charge attack, which you wouldn't expect to be possible on BL4. But speaking of the damage you can take, the interesting thing about Bloodborne is that in general you can take a lot more damage than that you can in Dark Souls. Specifically if you contrast BL4 to SL1. Basically in Bloodborne enemies tend to do a lot less damage per attack because enemies tend to attack in combos. So you can survive a lot more than you think when it comes to a single attack. The downside however is that blood vials do not heal a fixed amount of HP, but are percentage based. So it still takes 3 blood vials to fully heal your life bar. And that makes blood vials way more important on BL4 in Bloodborne than Estus is when doing SL1 in Dark Souls, as a single Estus can in fact completely heal your life bar. Of course, the benefit of not leveling up is that after each boss fight you can essentially use the echoes you get to buy new blood vials. Anyway, that's enough for now. There are a few more shards to pick up, so I will shut up for a minute and I will continue when we reach the elevator shortcut. And then it's of course time to take on the first bosses. Alright, so now we have all the required bloodstone shards to upgrade our weapon to +2, and we have access to both of the first bosses, so just for the sake of completion I will include the Cleric beast. But not only isn't there that much to say about it, given how similar it is to a regular playthrough, but you don't get anything useful from it. It's a completely optional boss, even though for most people it would have been the first boss they encountered in the game. Now, having said that, the interesting thing about the Cleric beast is that if it weren't for the fact that it was scaled to be the first boss and staggers very easily, this could actually have been a very difficult boss. In fact, in my opinion, the hardest boss in the game is Lawrence, which is essentially a souped up version of the Cleric beast. Now, something typical happened when I started to fight against the Cleric beast. Given that I tried to use Molotovs instead of my gun to hit the boss in the head in order to fully stagger him for a visceral. Well, if you've seen some of my other walkthroughs, then you might understand why it's rather typical for me. Because as some of you know, I really suck at aiming, and even though you cannot actually aim when you're locked on, it's still typical in a way. Anyway, as you likely already know, if you hit the Cleric beast in the head, he will stagger and you can perform a visceral attack. So that's always a good way to start a fight. However, even at this early point in the game, you will already see how weak visceral attacks are on BL4. Now all I can really say about this fight is that as long as you use transform attacks, and specifically on its limbs, which will cause the boss to roar and heal, so half the fight he's not even attacking. And when you stick to his sides, he might hit you with these short side swipe attacks, but those do very little damage. And because of the rally system, you might immediately regain that health anyway. However, if you want to avoid damage altogether, for the most part it's very safe if you stay at a distance and simply wait for him to finish his combos. As long as he doesn't directly do a jump attack at you, there's very little risk if you aren't close to him. It can also help to not lock on or to release the lock on when necessary, because that way the camera on this narrow bridge won't become the true boss in this fight. Alright, let's immediately continue on with Father Gascoigne. I will neither use the music box nor the staircase cheese tactic. You could do that of course, but it's much better to consider this fight as a learning opportunity. Specifically on how to deal with a low amount of stamina. Because stamina management is already one of the most important aspects of the Soulsborne series, but even more so on the lowest level. So first let's get up the stairs to make this a true one-on-one fight, meaning no hiding behind obstacles. We're also not going to parry him. Just focus on dodging, and when you attack, do an R1, then an L1, move back and press L1 again to transform the saw cleaver back into its original form. Now as I said before, transform attacks do poise damage. So each time you hit him like that, you will do a small stagger, or you break his animation if you will. And this way you do decent damage per attack, and you have enough stamina to get away from him. In fact, if you pay close attention to my stamina bar during this fight, almost the entire fight I have at least 25% remaining. The point is that you simply cannot afford spamming attacks, like you often can when you have a high level of endurance. So it's about making attacks count and about not draining your entire stamina bar, so you always have the opportunity to dodge out of the way. The only thing I find really annoying about Gascoigne is his gun. His shots are very difficult to see coming, but fortunately they also do little damage. So even if you take several hits from his gun, like I do in this fight, it's still just a small amount of damage. And when he is two-handing his axe, the shots come even more out of nowhere. When he transforms into a beast, he actually becomes a lot easier in my opinion. Although I start off a bit poorly. But as long as you dodge to his side, the rest of his combo will not hit you if you simply circle around with him. So basically there are only hitboxes in front of him, so as long as you manage to get to his side, you can keep attacking without getting hit. However, as you see, you do have to wait for the right opportunity. Oh, I almost forgot to pick up the brooch. In fact, I will be using the blood gem you get from it for a pretty long time. As I said before, I'm going through the game pretty fast, So there are specific locations, and very few of them, where I pick up blood gems. But given that I focus on upgrading my weapon as fast as possible, my damage output will always be sufficient. And once we reach the Nightmare of Menses, there's actually a location where you can farm powerful blood gems. Although that does require you to repeatedly kill winter lanterns. So I don't bother with that until the DLC. And speaking of the DLC, on your first BL4 playthrough, it might be advisable to just go for any percent. But for the sake of completion, I will include the DLC and the optional bosses from the main game as well. Okay, let's first pick up the hunter set here. And of course, let's not get grabbed by the invisible amygdala. You know, on my first playthrough when that happened, I initially thought that it was some sort of a crazy glitch. It's kind of a what the fuck moment. And then after beating Rom, you can suddenly see that there was this giant creature hanging from this building all this time. Anyway, if you really want to, you could go to the right and down the stairs to pick up bloodstone shards and even a blood gem, but we'll encounter enough bloodstone shards in Old Yharnam, so I chose to immediately go there. Now, technically you could get your weapon to +5 before fighting the Bloodstarved Beast, simply by purchasing the Hunter emblem and going the other way around, because that way you can collect twin Bloodstone shards. However, that's a bit overkill if you ask me. The Bloodstarved Beast is a really easy boss once you understand his movements. In fact, I'm not even going to use fire paper and beast blood on him. Nor will I distract him with pungent blood cocktails. It's an early boss, so it's going to be another learning opportunity. Remember that doing BL4 is about improving as a player and not about making things too easy on yourself. Well, emphasis on the word too, of course.
Take this.
Alright, Old Yharnam. As you know, there's a scurrying beast here to the right, so quickly go and catch it. And you will find another bloodstone shard there on the scaffolding. After that, I'm just going to quickly run through Old Yharnam to pick up the final bloodstone shards, required for a +3 weapon. And of course the first set of beast blood pellets, which are located close to the final shortcut. Although, as I said, I will not use them on the Bloodstarved Beast. But definitely pick them up, because they can only be found in very specific locations.
You there? Hunter! Didn't you see the wood? You are a skilled hunter.
Well, as you know, you need to be careful in the sections with the exploding pots. In fact, I almost died here when doing my No Hunter's Dream run. So, instead, just quickly run through it before they even have a chance to blow up in the first place. Okay, so what are you doing? Just going to stand there, right? Dude, get over here. Ah, god damn it, that's cheap. Okay, here are the final bloodstone shards we need. There are some more in this area, of course, but I'm not really that concerned with upgrading my gun, to be honest. Alright, over here to the left you can find no less than 6 beast blood pellets. Pretty important item to get, because you cannot buy them in the Hunter's Dream until you get the Cosmic Eye Watcher badge in the Upper Cathedral Ward. So that's quite late in the game. Fortunately, you can also find several of them in the forest area. Okay, watch out for the werewolf jumping through the door, and then at the top of the stairs we can open up the shortcut and upgrade the Saw Cleaver to +3, and of course insert the few blood gems that we have. So the next episode we're going to continue by taking on the Bloodstarved Beast, after which we automatically gain access to the rest of Cathedral Ward. So thanks for watching, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget the notification bell. And if you're interested, also check out my No Hunter's Dream run, or check out the rest of my channel to find walkthroughs for other games. And I hope to see you all back in episode 2.